God puts us in nations, in places, not by mistake, but to do a job. What if we opened our eyes to the needs of our colleagues, of our leaders, of our subordinates, and we were a priest on their behalf? Welcome to the Repurposing Business Podcast. My name is Brett Johnson.
And I'm Len Johnson.
And we're going to be talking about how to get our business into God's business. Our subtext is Let My Business Go, and we'll have guests from around the world. So thank you for joining us this week and every week on the Repurposing Business Podcast. Welcome to the Repurposing Business Podcast. My name is Brett Johnson, and I'm here today with Susan Hill. Welcome, Susan.
Thank you, Brett.
Susan is in Hout Bay, which is where Lynn and I used to live back in the dark ages, back in South Africa, and it's a lovely place. And Susan is originally from the US. And Susan, you've been in South Africa for how long now?
We've been living in South Africa for 20 years now.
20 years. So fair exchange. We came to the US and Nelson and Susan went to South Africa. And we're chatting today about whether you want your post-corona self to look like your former corona self. And we have Susan on because she's accomplished in many areas. But one of the things that strikes me about Susan is if you've ever watched a game of Scrabble and you've seen the two words that intersect, one is victim and the other is victor. And Susan is a victor. So she's been actually prepared for the kind of crisis that many are going through today because she's been around the block and been through multiple of those before and chosen to become better and not bitter. She's chosen to come at something from a perspective of, okay, this is for good. So we're chatting with Susan today and delight to have you here. So Susan, right now you are the director of a center in a community. So if you get the picture, there's a valley south of Cape Town and there's various communities there. There's a traditional, brown-skinned, what would be called in South Africa, colored community. There's a growing black community and there's also a so-called white community, and all of that is kind of mixed up. But you have this huge township that's grown up, an informal settlement, grown up some squatter camps, some low-income housing, and right in the middle of that is where Susan goes to work every day, right, Susan?
That's right. And you might say, Brett, that Hout Bay is a microcosm of Africa. It truly is, because we have all three types of people living right in the same place, right on top of one another.
Yeah, fascinating. And tell us about what you're running there, the center you're running there, Susan.
Okay, well, I'm the director of e014. e014 is e014, and it means the home of hope. And what it basically is it's first and foremost just that, the home of hope. It's a safe place for children. It's a partnership that we started with mothers and grannies and caregivers of orphaned and vulnerable children in this specific township called e014. Interestingly, e014, depending on who you ask, it either means my struggle or our collaboration.
Oh, wow.
So similar to what you were saying about victor and victim, you can see the difference, hey?
Amazing.
So
yes.
What we do there is we provide educational support and holistic support for orphan and vulnerable children and their families, for their extended caregivers and support system.
So the kids come after school,
Yes.
and then you do homework with them. Do you give them something to eat? What do you do?
Yeah, we do. The kids come after school. We pick them up. We support 7 different schools in Hout Bay. So the kids, because the township is, it's not as big as like some of the larger ones around here, but there's about 50,000 people living in our township. And the majority of them, I'd say 60% of them are children. So there's a lot of help that's needed. And what we do is, again, we help with homework. But, that's a big thing in itself. But we also have an educational program where we have a kid-friendly curriculum that helps the kids to learn what they should have learned in school, but they can't because, you've got one teacher, maybe 50 kids in a class. That teacher is teaching one style that she knows, and not every person is going to learn from that method. So what we try to do is put it into a kid-friendly perspective where the penny can drop for them. Hands-on, maybe it's singing. It could be, you know, a combination of different things that, reading, obviously, you know, games, activities, things like that, that help the kid to better grasp what it is they're supposed to learn.
Yeah. So Susan, take us back on your journey a little bit. So you're in the States doing all sorts of things. Nelson was working in a corporate and so on, and you somehow find yourselves in Atlanta, as I recall the story.
Yes,
And,
it's true.
yeah. And then you got involved in some steps of radical obedience. What were you doing in Atlanta?
Okay. Well, when Nelson and I got married in 1980, 3 years later, I had this sort of, I don't even know how to describe, incredible dream that I didn't know at the time was a prophetic dream. But in that dream, I had some very specific things God showed me that we were doing. And that would be, we were in some sort of a place where I couldn't recognize it. It looked like something that had happened after a nuclear war or something. I mean, I had never seen a township, obviously. I didn't know what ruins, you know, could be found, but that's what it looked like, is a place of ruins, a place where people were just desperately trying to come out of their situations. And we were there. I don't know what, you know, really not sure how we got there, but what we were doing was we were, you know, out looking for food, looking for, you know, ways to continue to help ourselves, and in a sense of helping ourselves get out of a situation. And we'd run across people and end up taking them back to where we were staying, helping them, you know, giving them a hot meal, getting a hot bath, just, you know, sort of shoring them up in a way, if you will. And then in the dream, we would lead them into these underground glass tunnels. They were air conditioned and they were well lit. And I mean, I thought, how do you interpret all of that? I couldn't even fathom it, you know? But what happened was, as a result of that, and we started reading the Bible and, you know, learning about Nehemiah and Isaiah 61, we were in a really pretty active church, a vineyard church that where John Wimber, you know, we learned he walked into a church one day and he said, excuse me, when do you do these things that you read about? And the particular church that he went to said, oh, we don't do that. We just read about it. Yeah. And so that really caught us really like, wow, we want to be those people that are doing it. Acts 2:42, that's what we want to do. So as a result of the dream, we started doing small outreaches. We had a home church, and we used to do small Saturday outreaches where we'd take food to people and do different things. But, you know, over the time, I think it wasn't long, we just realized that through that dream that God wanted us really to do more. And so we ended up, our kids were small. We sold our house. We sold our cars, our antiques, everything. And we moved to the inner city of Atlanta to literally start a ministry for homeless and poor people. We just thought it was going to be a ministry. We didn't, a full-time ministry, okay, obviously, but we didn't have any idea that it would become a church and a bigger organization. And it did. And so, yeah, that's the small, short version of that story. But what happened was we met people on the street. We met people in the projects of the inner city of Atlanta who really wanted to change their lives, but they didn't have a clue how. And, you know, obviously many of them were, not all of them, but many of them were having difficulties. You know, either they'd lost their jobs, they weren't at home anymore, they'd become addicted to some substance. And so we started helping them rebuild their lives. But I remember when we did this was over a 10-year period, I said to Nelson, my husband, it's not exactly what was in the dream, but it's a start, you know? So
what leapt you from there to South Africa?
So in the process of, I think from the beginning, we had this sense of there's something in South Africa for us. There's something in Africa that we know we're called to. I think as a child, you know, when you're 5 years old, you're asked, you know, what are you going to be when you grow up? Yeah. And, you know, the first time somebody asked me, I said, I'm going to be a missionary. And my dad looked at me like, no, you're not. And, I mean, my greatest aspiration was I'm going to be a missionary in Africa one day, you know, and I never got to. And so, you know, we met a person who was pretty unique, and her story had a way of just really changing us. And that was Jackie Pullinger, who also did something similar and moved to Hong Kong and really invested her life in the poor and the heroin addicts. And as a result, she had a real impact on us. And so we started doing similar things. But we knew it was unto more. And so interestingly, when we sold our house and everything, one of the things I said to my husband was, look, we're never going to get to go on any big vacations or do any fun stuff again, because now we're going to be missionaries. So we have to take our kids someplace on a fun vacation. So pick whatever you want and let's do it. So his biggest thing was always wanting to be, he'd done many sailing excursions. He'd sailed on tall ships and things like that. So he wanted to take us on something like that. So we chartered a sailboat in the Caribbean and took our kids, and we had a lovely 3-week trip of just living on that boat. And funny enough, the kids on the boat, and they literally were like, 20 somethings, they were all from South Africa.
The crew.
The whole crew was from South Africa. So they would tell us stories about their life in South Africa. And they were so eager to know, well, how is it that missionaries can come on a trip like this? So it was a great, exciting travel time. But at the same time, I think it's what formed in our hearts that we knew that's where we're supposed to go. Yeah. So although we couldn't do it then because it was the beginning of starting the United States, we knew that one day we would. And so, later, about 10 years later, we went to help serve in Hong Kong with Jackie Pullinger. And during that time, we met a couple of her friends who were living in South Africa and serving there. And so they basically said, well, if you ever do come, look us up. And what they didn't know was that was sort of our scouting out the land, sort of, let me see if it's okay, if we can manage to take our kids and do this, and take this leap of faith. And so they didn't know that that's what we were asking, but they sort of encouraged us. And so we hadn't told anybody, but lots of people, we had a big conference at home at the church, and we had lots of people who just decided, what's the next thing for Ned and Susan? They're up to something. And there was a prophet that basically called us right out of the crowd and said, his name's James Gall. He said, hey, yeah, you two, I heard about you the other night. God told me you're going to someplace far, far away. So it's a confirmation. He literally told us, it's 7 hours away. It's called the Dark Continent. Oh, it's South Africa. And see, we had actually made up our minds on our trip back from Hong Kong that we were going to tell everybody. He made the announcement for us.
Very nice. Very nice. Well, that's a real confirmation. And you probably needed to be able to look back on such direct leading, because I'm assuming it wasn't all plain sailing in South Africa. And,
no, it wasn't.
And I know you arrived with a huge agenda. You arrived, you walked the streets, you prayed, you did that good stuff. And so fast forward to when we met. Where were you? What were you doing? And because you joined the Repurposing Business Training a couple of years ago, right? So
we spent 10 years just really doing, as you said, walking the streets, prayer walking, just really, what do you want us to do here, God? And literally we found ourselves like, well, let's just lend our expertise to other NGOs and things, rather not reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of people doing good work. Let's just help some of them. So that's what we found ourselves doing. And when, around that time, I got invited to come to Ikaila Temba and see what they were up to and what they were doing, and wouldn't I like to be the director there? And I was like, oh, I don't know if I do or I don't, because I'd been through many. It wasn't easy in South Africa for us at first. We had our challenges and stuff. We went through quite a few crises, but long story short, I chose to go to Ikaia and become their director. And I naively did not realize that meant I was going to be doing all the fundraising. Mm-hmm. I thought, oh, well, surely they've got a foundation and they're, but they didn't. So that put me into a real, luminaries are like their challenges. So it wasn't a hard one for me, but it was certainly a great challenge. And during the midst of the first couple of years there, because there were others that had been there longer than me, there was a bit of a crisis situation. But I also am involved in lots of other things and have lots of other friends in South Africa. And one of the things that we were doing was hiking on a regular basis on the mountain in Constantia Neck and other places. And actually one of the ladies there told me about a course that was going to be offered, and an introductory course. And I was very interested in it. Repurposing business was what it was all about. And so I went to that, and, you know, always I had longed for, where was the place where, you know, God came into business, because it shouldn't be separate. I knew that it should be one, but I just didn't know how could it be? So I was intrigued by hearing that, and just listening to you talk about that in the first couple of courses that we did, you know, just as a sample. I knew I had to come, and I knew that God had something big for us in it. So, and as a result, after I went through the Repurposing business course, it revived me. It reminded me of our purpose, what God had sent us here for, again, because we had been through quite a few difficulties, and just to the point where we literally thought, should we keep on going? I mean, what are we doing? It's sort of like the disciples, you know, when Jesus was gone, and it was like, well, let's just go back to fishing. I mean, we really didn't know. We had gone back to America trying to help the ministry that we had begun, but it just didn't seem to work out. And so when we came back, we were sort of like battered and worn and not knowing where we were going to go or what we're going to do. And then Repurposing business came along and reignited our flame and our passion, and for not only South Africa, but all of Africa.
Yeah. Aren't you glad that happened before this whole COVID thing kicked in, right? So that
Absolutely.
You were back on the horse and moving forward with speed.
So thankful, because I don't know if we would have had the momentum to do now what I know we can do. You know,
Yeah.
6 years of being at Akaya, and building relationships and raising funds, and things like winning the Entrepreneur of the Year award, you know, stuff like that. Really just kept that momentum going to a place where I could really see myself doing more. And so when you then announced about the Restart program, I was really, really excited about that, because I knew that I needed that kick. I needed that, you know, I was at a point just pre-COVID of just, okay, I've done all I can do. But I didn't really realize how much I was doing in my own self, in my own flesh, and not realizing how much more I could trust God. I mean, I had heard that whole thing of Hebrews 4 and rest from your labors, but, you know, you don't tell a workaholic to do that. That's too hard to do, you know?
Yes. Lynn and I had a chat the other day about Mary and Martha, you know, and she's like, everybody's like, no, you shouldn't be a Martha, you should be a Mary, you know, and I think there's a seasonal aspect to that. I mean, we seriously need Marthas as well. And I know Jesus,
I think so.
Yeah, you've chosen the better way, but it was just in that moment, in that particular thing, you know. I don't think it's a general rule for every woman on the planet, you know.
You mentioned that, Brett, and I don't know if you know this, but, you know, I'd say about 20 years ago, I was desperately praying, please, Lord, can I be married? Please, can I be married?
Shut up and wash the dishes, you know, or get on with the job, you know. Yeah, no, it's interesting. It's interesting. Yeah,
it's funny, you would ask to be married, but not realize or recognize just how to do that, you know. So I'm really thankful for the courses, because I think it's really helped me so much to realize and to read the word with bigger eyes, you know, with new eyes, new glasses.
Fantastic. So great. So what would your tips be, Susan, if somebody's thinking, you know, I've been God spoke to me, it was unusual, it was a dream, it was some well-known prophet saying something, I go to the ends of the earth, but it's just not happening the way I thought it would happen. You know, because then hope deferred can kick in, disappointment with God, disappointment with yourself, second guessing, did we hear God? There's all of those normal things that bundle up to discourage people and cause us to lose our momentum. What would be some of your key tips for somebody that finds himself in this sort of the malaise of God spoke, but it's not quite happening the way I thought it would happen? What would some of your key takeaways be?
Well, you're probably familiar with the movie Braveheart.
Yes.
William Wallace.
Yeah.
And there's a point, well, many points, but there's one point where they're on the battlefront and they're facing that huge English army. And Wallace turns around to his friend and he says, well, what are we going to do? He says, well, we didn't get dressed up for nothing. Let's
Yeah.
do this then, you know? And I'd have to say, to remind, you know, I know that every time since that movie, whenever I've met up with an obstacle or a challenge, well, I didn't get dressed up for nothing. I must be doing something right if I'm meeting with this challenge. So that's one tip that I would say really, really helps a lot, is to recognize that the enemy might be, you know, throwing you a couple of curveballs to get you off track. You know, I mean, as simple as Pilgrim's Progress, we know that that's exactly what happened to him many times. And it happens to us. It's a reality. You know,
So if you're attracting an army, you're in the right place.
Yeah. And, I often would find myself sort of, well, wow, if I could just get back on track. Well, the way you get back on track is you stop believing that stuff, and you remind yourself, wait a minute, what's, as we learned in repurposing your business, you go back to your purpose and you start redefining or reminding yourself, okay, what did God say to me from the beginning? Now, how can I move forward? I don't necessarily look at the steps where I lost it or I'm, dropped off the path or whatever. I just know, okay, let me go back to the place where I knew I was right with God and carry on from there. Because when we align with God, it can happen. He can't, it's not that he won't. It's that there are things that I really think God can't do if we don't partner with him.
Yeah.
And we think that we're partnering with him because, I moved all the way to Africa, for crying out loud,
Mm. Yeah, recently we had a situation recently where there was, an obstacle or whatever, and God said to Lynn, get back in the game. You can't, the first time you have a bit of opposition, you can't just say, okay, well, I'm out of here, and
exactly.
you have to stay in the game is part of the thing. Showing up for the battle, staying in the game. Awesome. Other tips, Susan?
And I think you need to face your challenges also. I think that's a very important thing. Another thing we learned in repurposing business is face those things, embrace them, work through them and learn through them, because God's trying to communicate with you in those times. And the easy thing to do is to, check out and take a few days off because my head's like swimming. I'm freaked out. I don't know. I don't think I can do it. But in that time when you're freaked out is the time that you're opening the door to even more of an onslaught of the enemy. So don't go that route. Look for, okay, there's a more direct pattern. If I could go back to quoting, Jesus said he is the way and he made a way for us. So look for that way. And you'll find that way back in those 10 Ps and getting back to purpose and what you're doing with your life, Yes.
Yeah. And so the other thing, how about media? What do you do in terms of your consumption of media? There's good news and bad news out there. Is that a factor in your staying encouraged?
It is. I look for encouragement. I look for those things that will encourage me. I look for, podcasts and, like I said, taking courses like Restart. Restart was huge for me. It was great that it was a Zoom call and we didn't have to go someplace because, things like that take so long. You have to drive somewhere. You have to, it takes a whole lot more time out of your day than an hour long program. But what happened with Restart, it became more than just a little something that can keep you going. I mean, it opened up a community. And it's a community to me that is more of the Christ-like, church-like community that God meant for us to be, in and moving in. So for me, that's something that I found very powerful about Restart, and I find very powerful about finding people that you want to be like, people that and looking for mentors that are maybe a little bit ahead of you in maybe not exactly what you do, but you see qualities that you like in a person, or not that you just like, but you see as successful.
Yeah, fantastic.
Ways to help you move forward, ways that will challenge you. One thing in particular is finding people who will ask you the hard questions.
Right.
Because for me, it's easy. I mean, easy in the sense of most things are not a challenge for me. And I can get where I'm just coasting along. But when I coast along, I know that there's danger because I'm not really digging deep enough into what I need to get there. You can't just coast along. If you're going down to Florida, you just can't, you know, there's a road when you drive from Atlanta to Florida, you can go 95 or you can go 75. But if you don't pay attention, if you're going down 75, you'll miss the turnoff and you'll be in Alabama or, you know. So it's things like that you know, it is logistical, but you don't think about it when you're in the moment, I think. And so finding other people who have maybe been in some of the situations you've been in, or a little ahead of the curve than you are, will help you, point you in the right direction. Yeah.
And are you feeling coming out of the season that are you asking God to shrink your problems or give you bigger challenges?
I'm not asking either way, because it's a dangerous thing. Be careful what you pray for. But I would say, I am asking. And that is because there's a bigger picture for me. Obviously, they started coming out of the repurposing class. God began to give me greater vision for bigger things. And so, I am asking for the how-to and the road for what that looks like, for vision for that, so that I can get there. And I believe I'm getting there. I share some with my staff in ways that I look for sparks from them to see who's going to pick up on the right things that will be willing to take maybe my place, so that I can move further down the road and do more of what God's called me to do. Because you never can. I'm not a settler. I'm a definite pioneer. Nelson and I both have always been pioneers. We're not those kind of people that settle down. We just have to keep pushing forward, because there's a lot to be done. And it doesn't matter whether I'm 20 or if I'm 60, there's still much to be done. And I'm excited about that. I'm glad that, we said long ago, what's retirement? How do you do that? Maybe you retire from being the workaholic and you actually align with God and partner with him and do the things that he created you to do, and you find life in that. And that's, I think, what repurposing business and Restart has done for me.
Great. Fantastic. So, Susan, it's been great to see how, I don't want to say you've been undaunted, because you have had some new challenges with the, as everybody has had with the COVID thing, but you've been well prepared for it. And, that must have meant a lot to your team, for them to know that you had a certain confidence in God in the midst of a difficult situation. Tell us a bit about your fence.
That's a very good one. We find ourselves, being right on the edge of the township makes it a bit, interesting living and working there, protecting assets, protecting the property, and also being on the side of a mountain, in Hout Bay, where the wind blows both ways and the rain comes at you like that, not down. So, in this time of COVID, it also has caused literally so many people to lose jobs. Restaurants are closing, businesses are closing, tourism is at a standstill. It's really, people are taking strain, and people in the township are taking even more strain. I mean, they're already living under strain, but now it's become, really more desperate. And so we've had, I think just at the beginning of COVID, we started really having a string of robberies, and most of our property is protected, but we had some construction work building a new high school on one side, and in that side, the fence deteriorated, and we weren't protected. So, I had in the back of my mind, I know God, probably around July, God will want me to say, let's start raising money for the fence. But then when these things started happening in March, laptops being stolen, our electricity for every building was ripped completely out, because people were after copper wire to sell it. So you can imagine, I think we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 buildings that we had to replace all the electricity in, which gets expensive. So I started, I had said to the caretaker, well, do you want to get paid or do you want to have a fence? And he said, no, come on, God wants to do both. Surely he does. And I said, well, I know he does. He said, look, we've needed that fence forever, and we had. But, basically it was a point where I had to just walk on the water. We had one really bad case, and they ripped up everything of this building. And I just said, that's it. I have to do this. And I just called the guy and I said, he wanted 480,000 rand to do a fence, a galvanized steel fence that's 3 meters high. And I think it's 280 meters long. So, I just had to push the button. I knew if I didn't, I was going to be in trouble. So I just keep having things happen, and that gets expensive. So I went for it, and I said, but I don't have that money right now. So you're going to have to do this in phases. And so give me phase 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and however many, And so we ended up agreeing to 3 phases. And basically then that's exactly what I did, is I took bite sizes of that. And I said, okay, I can raise this much, and I can raise, I started off with the big total picture, but I knew it wasn't going to all come in one place. I knew it was going to be small portions. But at the same time, as I did it, I literally, I paid off that first phase 1 payment, and I thought, I just gave him a lot of money. I hope he's going to come through, and will we be able to then do the next part and the next part? And I think it was just one of those things where, walk on the water. Taking a leap of faith means that you believe it. It's going to happen, and you have to believe it in order to accomplish it, I think. And so, that's what I had to do. I had to decide, okay, am I going to kind of freak out now and falter and whine and sort of, whinge here, or am I going to go for it? Yeah. And so, my strategic mind said, make a plan, make a campaign. Media has to do it. You're going to have to make this happen. And I did.
Fantastic.
I mean, I didn't. God did it, Literally, it was a lot of prayer, but it was, and a lot of my new community on Restart helped a lot with that. And just, talking over conversations about how can it be done? And I mean, people believing in me. And I think that's the power of community, is getting behind people and believing in them. And my staff actually, knowing how I made that decision, I shared it with them. I said, guys, I don't know if we'll have enough to do both things, but this is what I think we should do. Yeah. God will partner with us if we partner with him. If we believe what he says, he'll do it. He'll come through. And they came around to believing that with me. I mean, they desperately wanted the fence. They knew they couldn't protect it. I mean, 10 people standing, at night, all night couldn't keep us from the theft that was happening. The only way we could do it was to believe and ask for a miracle. And that's what we did. And I think just last week, we got the final last complete deposit on it. And he's finishing, I met with him today. He's finishing up phase 2 and about to do phase 3. So thank you, God. But in the midst of that, my staff literally saw me for the first time. And I think that's what God does, is he puts us in situations where we don't move with him and partner with him and believe that he'll partner with us, or we can, sit on the sidelines and shake violently and hope and pray. You know what I mean?
Yeah, fantastic. Well, it's a good way to wrap up. I think it's a there are practical things we can do. We can change our mindsets. We can look back at how God in your story had prepared you for some of the big changes to come. And then just recognize that it's the strategy of the enemy to get us discouraged and to get us paralyzed. I think that's one of the big problems with this whole pandemic, is that it paralyzed us. Yeah. And so just to say, okay, what's the one thing I can do, whether it's to build a fence or whether it's to take an initiative on something rather than wait and actually just get into a malaise. Yeah. And I loved your point about, we didn't get dressed up for nothing. So I think it's also, it's important.
And even with that, it's not just about a fence. It's about, we've got families who can't provide for their kids. They can't put food on their table. They can't. So what can we do?
Yeah.
We're blessed to be a blessing, aren't we? So what does that look like? Yeah. What blessing do they need? And how can we tangibly do that?
Yeah.
And I believe that's what God asks of us.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, Susan, thank you so much for being on the podcast. And
thank you, Susan
is the director at Ikaya Latemba, and it's we'll have to just give you in the details of this. We'll give you the notes. We'll give you the web address. So watch out for that. You can find out more about what Susan is doing over there. And Susan is a graduate of our Repurposing Business program. She went through Restart, and Nelson, her husband, went through the Executive Intensive. So they've been through about all sorts of things with REAP, which is fantastic. And we're delighted to be partnered with you, Susan. So thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Very thankful that you and Lynn have come along. Very, very thankful. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Susan. Thank you so much.
Take care.